All right, so let's walk through this. What are some ways that African Americans improved their lives during the Eisenhower administration?
They boycotted, they had demonstrations,
Okay, boycotted.
like public businesses and things of such.
Okay, businesses, buses, demonstrations. Yes, ma'am.
Did they also use the court system more? during this
Yes, they also use the courts. So you have Brown versus Board of Education. So not only are they going out and demonstrating and trying to get news reports and media to show what's going on, but they also go through the courts and enforce the issue, right? All right. So yeah, I was just looking for some of those examples. And so if you threw a couple of those examples in, then you were good to go. All right. So let's start out. We were talking about the 50s, right? What do you guys know about the 50s?
My parents were born in it.
Okay. Yeah. This is probably way too old. Have you guys ever seen Happy Days, the show, TV show? All right. It's funny because I, saw that and my dad's like, yeah, that's not realistic. Now that I am older and they have TV shows about when I grew up, I'm like, yeah, he's right. Hollywood never gets anything right. But after World War II, if you remember, you have the GI Bill, so that keeps people out of the workforce. It gives people opportunities to buy houses. It gives people opportunities to learn either a trade or get a college degree. So all of a sudden you have lots of people who are very skilled, able to get out into the workforce. Houses are being built, lots of opportunities. Factories are exploding because you have more money. And because you have more money, when the factories transfer to consumer goods, everyone has been saving up their money for the last 4 years during the war, plus you're in good jobs, so now everybody can spend. So this is not the same as the end of World War I, where you roll into a depression. I guess it is because you kind of have this bump. But in World War II, it's like, yes, now we're going to go ahead and spend. We're going to go ahead and take care of things. And so they start buying, and life is pretty good, right? So interestingly enough, it is also pretty good for minorities in some ways. They get opportunities to go in and work. They get opportunities, their wages increase. So there are a lot of things that are very positive for minorities. There is an expansion of civil rights. Now, a lot of that is pushed by the African Americans or other minorities, right? And they say, hey, we want these civil rights, and they take it to the government, the federal government, or they take it to the people through the press. But they are getting opportunities. As money becomes easier, people are able to move out into the suburbs. So you get that nice little house with the white picket fence, and everything is nice. You have your 2.4 kids, right? And so everybody, life is getting better. Life is really nice. And so now you just got to keep up with the Joneses. So what do I mean, keep up with the Joneses?
Nice cars, nice house.
All right, if they get a newer car, then I need a newer car, right? If they get a better house, then I need to figure out how to move into that area. So everything is kind of like I want to be like everyone else. However, with this comes this incredible pressure to conform. So if everyone joins the Elks, then you need to join the Elks. If everyone joins the VFW, you need to join the VFW. And this actually starts to work its way into employment. So I will tell you a little story about my life. When I first joined the Air Force, I was told, hey, you have to join the Officers Club. And I'm like, don't really care about the officers club. And they said, no, you actually do. You join the club, and then after work, everyone goes to the club and you hang out at the club, and you either have a beer or you take your wife for dinner, but you have to be seen at the club. I didn't really want to go there, but I went ahead and joined. My job was not an 8 to 5 job, so a lot of times I was working while they were there, so it didn't bother me that much, except that I had to pay my dues. Again, in the Air Force, big deal that you pay all your debts on time, right? So 1 month, I get called into the commander's office, and he says, Lieutenant, we have a problem. I said, what's the problem? And he said, you haven't paid your officers club dues. And I said, no, sir, I paid them. He said, well, you come back and prove it to me. So I drove home. At that time, you have to drive home because there's no cell phones. I got the canceled check. I brought it back to his office. I said, here's the canceled check. I did pay it. And he said, okay, you're right. And he wrote down a little note and he said, I'll talk to the leadership and everything will be fine. Okay. So the next month, about the same time, all of a sudden, I get a call from the commander, I need you to come in. Anybody have thoughts on what it might be? Yeah, I walk in, he's like, Lieutenant Bath, we're very concerned. You didn't pay your O Club bill this month. I said, no, sir, I paid my bill. I have proof. Let me go home. So I went home, grabbed the check, came back. Here is the check. He's like, okay, he writes a little note. I'll let the leadership know. Everything's fine. Next month, what do you think happens? Same thing. I was furious because I'm getting called into my boss's office being told, hey, we might have to fire you. We might have to, put you in jail. I'm like, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So once I show him my check, what do you think the next thing I do is?
Don't call me in here again.
I went to the O Club and I said, I quit. You've gotten me in trouble with my boss 3 months in a row because you're idiots. I'm not part of this organization anymore. I quit. And I was really happy and I was all smug and, I walked home and I was like, yes, life is good. Until the next month. And that month he called me in and he said, Lieutenant Bath, we really appreciate you being part of the organization, but you're a flight commander and we're not certain that you have the skills and the demeanor that we need to be a leader. And I went, what? And so I walked through and I'm like, what did I do wrong? And I said, sir, did I do something, wrong with discipline of the people working for me? He's like, oh, no, you've done really well on that. I said, do I not know my job well enough? Am I not, competent in my job? And he said, oh no, you're very competent in your job. And I'm just like, what could have happened that I'm getting fired? And then all of a sudden it hit me. What do you think it is? I quit the club. And I said, sir, is this because I quit the O Club? And he said, well, we just want you to be able to express the values of the Air Force and blah, blah, blah. And he would never tell me. And I said, okay, if I go back and join the club today, are you going to fire me? And he said, oh, I would really love if you would go back and join the club. So I went back, I joined the club, I paid the money, I came back, and I said, sir, I joined the club. And he said, great. I'm really happy to have you back as a flight commander, and everything is good. So what did I learn from that lesson?
Status.
Yeah, you have to be part of this organization that is what the organization wants you to, the company that you're in wants you to be part of. And if you're not going to get ahead. Now, what did me sitting at a bar with other guys 2 times a week have to do with my ability to do my job?
Created a social network for you.
Yeah, I mean, nothing, right? I mean, other than I was there supporting the thing that they were supporting. And so this is what you're going to see here is all of these people become white-collar workers. Not all, but many people become white-collar workers. And by the way, why do we call it white-collar workers? If you worked in IBM, everyone wore a white shirt and a tie. If you came in a shirt that was not white, then you were ostracized, sort of like not being part of the club, right? So you have to wear the same clothes, you have to be in the same organizations, you have to live in the same area. Everybody has, 2 to 3 kids because that's enough kids, but not too many. If you don't have kids, then obviously something's wrong with you. But if you have 6 kids, well, wait a minute, something's way wrong with you. So everybody, there's this requirement to conform, right? What happens if you don't conform?
Social suicide.
Social suicide and work suicide. You will probably not get fired, but you're never going to get ahead because you're expected to be at these things. And so this is where you see some problems. The first problem is with minorities. The minorities are not allowed to live in certain neighborhoods. So what does that mean for your ability to be around the boss around your neighborhood? Yeah, you can't do it if you're not allowed in the neighborhood. What if they want you to join a lodge and you're not allowed to join the lodge? What does that do for your employment opportunities? You can get employed, but you can't get promoted into the higher level opportunities because you're not part of this organization. But you're not part of this organization because they don't let you be part of this organization. And this is where minorities started having different problems than they had before. It's the same kind of problems of upward mobility getting shut off, but it's for different reasons now, right? The other thing that's kind of interesting is credit cards are issued in 1949. Why do you think people need credit cards? What do credit cards do for you?
Put you in debt.
Okay, we all know, yes, they put you in debt and they really keep you from getting ahead. But what do credit cards tell you they do for you?
Build your credit.
Okay, they build your credit. What can you do with a credit card?
Buy stuff.
Buy stuff when you don't have the money, right? And so what happens if I'm in a position where everybody is getting a nice new volleyball net and they're all playing volleyball in the front yard, and you're like, oh, my kids want to play volleyball in the front yard, but you don't have the money to pay for the net. What do? You put it on the credit card. What is the problem with this? You don't have the money, so you get further and further in debt. But this is the first time that you will see credit cards issued. We talked about a couple of lessons ago that they started having advertisements. And so now you have this pressure to conform plus advertisements, and people start having to have money. Now, the other thing, so minorities have struggles, women kind of have struggles too. I will go back to an Air Force story because that's what I know. Thankfully, this part was over by the time that I got there, but a friend of mine said that he got into the Air Force, they got a house on base, everything's good, they're kind of setting up the house, and all of a sudden, knock, 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 somebody's at the door. His wife goes to the door, and there's an older lady there. And I probably shouldn't say that because I'm sure she is way younger than I am now. But his wife says, yes, ma'am, what can I do for you? And she says, oh, I'm Mrs. Smith. I'm the commander's wife. Our Officers' Wives Club meets Monday afternoon at 2 p.m. Well, Beth, my friend's wife, is a teacher. And she said, oh, well, I'm really sorry. I won't be able to meet that because I teach. Any thoughts on what the commander's wife's first response was? She said, well, I'm sorry, honey. If you don't care about your husband's career, I guess no one else has to either. So what did she just tell her? You have to quit your job because your husband won't get ahead if you don't come to these meetings. They're at the same time as your school, right? Now, in that case, thankfully, I am not from the 50s. I know you guys probably don't know that, but she was able to go ahead and teach. Her husband's career wasn't hurt that badly. I mean, he retired as a full colonel, so obviously he did fine. But I think it was because it was at the end of that time. In the 50s, if you had responded, no, I'm going to go ahead and teach, your husband's career would have been done. So everybody had roles that they had to do. This is who you are. This is the role you'll play. This is how you'll act. This is how you'll, where you're going to go. This is what you're going to do with your time. So very, very conforming, like these are the things that you need to do. There's cultural expectations. So you have lots of money, things are good, but not everybody's happy, right? All right. The other thing that happens in 1952 is we are looking for a new president. So, if you are in 1952, who do you think would be the coolest guy to be the president?
A general who just won World War II.
There you go. The general that just defeated Hitler, right? And amazingly enough, we have one of those. Dwight D. Eisenhower. Dwight D. Eisenhower retires from the Army. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. When you are part of the military, can you express a support for any political organization? No. It's illegal. You are a federal employee, and as a federal employee, you fall under the Hatch Act. The Hatch Act says that you cannot express political viewpoints in your position as a federal employee. So Eisenhower has just retired from the military after about 30 years. What political party is he associated with? And the answer is no one knows. Because he has voted, but he does not express an opinion either way. He works for Republican presidents, he works for Democratic presidents. At the end of the day, no one has any idea. So the Democrats actually come in and they talk to him and they say, we would like you to be our presidential candidate. And Eisenhower says, you know what? Thank you very much for the opportunity, but I really don't want to do that. A little bit after that, the Republicans talk to him and they say, we would like you to be our presidential candidate. And he says, okay, I will run for the Republicans. So he is now the Republican nominee. The Democrats have to figure out who are they going to run with. Now, realistically, who's going to defeat Eisenhower? Nobody. So they have to get somebody to be there, but they recognize that this is going to be a tough fight. They get Adlai Stevenson, who is the UN ambassador to the UN. And so they bring him in. He doesn't really want the nomination, but he says, okay, I will take it. The Democrats are struggling. They're divided over civil rights still. They pledged to continue the Korean War, and they pledged to support labor unions. The Republicans under Eisenhower say we will end the Korean War, we're going to push back communists, and we will restore the authority to the state and local areas that was taken away under FDR. So at the end of the day, does anybody really care what the platforms say? No. The candidates are way more important than the campaigns, and so Eisenhower is elected. This is not a dominating election, but it's a pretty solid win, right? He gets elected by over 6.5 million popular votes, and the election itself is pretty solid. All right. Once Eisenhower gets in, we're going to talk about his domestic agenda today. Some people declared that he is a do-nothing president. They say, we never see Eisenhower do stuff. In fact, sometimes when there was a crisis, Eisenhower would go golfing. And it's interesting because presidents do that now. Any thoughts on why Eisenhower might go golfing when things get tough?
Relaxing.
Okay, it relaxes him. One of the things I learned in the military is if you go golfing with someone, they are stuck with you for 18 holes.
4 to 5 hours. 4 to 5 hours.
Yeah. So if you want to put pressure on someone, all you have to do is say, hey, let's go golfing. And the next thing you know, you have them for hours and they can do, basically they are going to hang with you, right? But it is something they can do. All right, so he allows farmers, farm workers, domestic workers, professionals like doctors and lawyers, pastors, anybody who wants to can join Social Security. He also adds disability benefits. So what do the disability benefits do?
Give money to people who are disabled.
Yes. If you can't work, then we will take care of you because the government should be ensuring that everyone can, have what they need. All right. The other thing that's kind of interesting is he comes up with interstate highways. What is the ultimate purpose of an interstate highway?
Get faster between places.
Okay, you can move between places faster, right? Now, the interesting piece of this is he calls this a military necessity. What's going on right now that would make interstate highways a military necessity? Okay, you have the Korean War, you have the Cold War, right? And what makes the Cold War different? Nuclear weapons. So, if I have a nuclear war and I live in Houston. What do I need? I need roads, right? So when you drive on interstate highways in a major city, have you ever noticed that there are lanes that are additional lanes, or it will have signs up that say, hey, these lanes will turn into the opposite direction in a national emergency? Eisenhower set it up that if you live in a major city that could be attacked by nuclear weapons, then they will have roads that will be huge and everyone can get out of those cities, hopefully within less than an hour, right? So interstate highways were initially designed to get people out of the major cities and out into the country where they're not going to be attacked, to allow the Army to be able to move quickly from one area to another if need be. Now, the other part of that is if you have these major roads, you can move goods more quickly and more efficiently from place to place, right? So the military requirement was there, and that's why they built the interstate highways. But once they are built, then it increases the flow of goods, reduces the cost of goods, and allows different places to have different stuff. Eisenhower also becomes the last president to reduce spending in the federal government. So I really do appreciate him for that. All right, so we talked about kind of some of the things he does outside of minorities. What about for minorities? Now, Eisenhower says, I'm going to give power back to the state and local government. So if he wants to give power back to the state and local governments, can he force civil rights down people's throats? No. And he refuses to. He says, if I try to do that, it's going to be like Reconstruction, and they are going to, incite groups like the KKK, and it's just going to create problems. What I am going to do is push slowly and try to make solid dents, right? So some of the things he does, he desegregates public services in D.C. Why would he desegregate public services in D.C.? First, what are public services?
Courthouse.
The courthouse, buses, anything that the government provides the service, right? Parks. Why would he desegregate public services in D.C.?
It's under the federal government.
It's under the federal government. It's D.C. It's not at the state level. So he says, I have the authority to do this. And once you do it in D.C., then hopefully things will move. He desegregates schools on military bases. Why would he do that? It's under the federal government. It's under the federal government's control. So Truman desegregated the military. He desegregates the schools on military installations. So do you see his thought process here? All right. Now, Brown versus Board of Education. The Supreme Court assists him in this, right? What does Brown versus the Board of Education talk about?
Basically separate but equal.
All right.
Ruling.
So it's separate but equal. Does the Supreme Court like separate but equal?
Depends on the time period.
Okay. At this point, what does the Supreme Court say about separate but equal?
Why is it separate if it's equal?
Right. They say there is no such thing as separate but equal, right? If you separate, there is no way you can make everything equal. So stop lying. Once you segregate, once you pull a group of people apart and you say there's this group and this group, even in classrooms, I will I will just argue that there will never be equal classrooms because if a different teacher is teaching, they will be teaching it with a different style, they will be teaching in a different way, they will use different grading mannerisms, right? So it's never equal. Now it can equalize based on, okay, you know, everybody's trying to do the same thing, but especially if I make the division, it is almost never equal. So at this point, who has money? Who has the most money? It's going to be white neighborhoods, right? So their schools are going to have more money. If you have more money, then you can take care of sports, you can take care of books, you can take care of better teachers, right? And so this now creates an unequal playing field. And so Brown versus the Board of Education says there is no such thing as separate but equal, and so they demand racial integration with all deliberate speed. So let's walk through. What does all deliberate speed mean? Why would they use that term?
Because some schools might try to hold off on integrating people together.
Yes. So the problem you have is they want everybody to move as quickly as possible. Are some schools going to be able to move more quickly than other schools? Yeah. If I have a school of 50 people, I can probably integrate quicker than a school with 7,000, right? And so they're saying, hey, you move as quickly as you can. They don't put a date, because if they put a date, there are going to be schools that could move faster that will then slow down, or there are going to be schools that say, you know, we're doing our absolute best, but we just can't make that date. And so they just said, move with all deliberate speed. This actually comes out to have a huge impact that we will talk about in just a little bit. When they do this, over 100 congressmen throw an absolute fit and say, this is not right. You cannot force integration from the federal government. So it's fascinating that under FDR, you have people who say, hey, give me the authority we would have if we were invaded. And there are people, and probably much of the same guys, who are frustrated by this. But when we say, hey, the Supreme Court says you have to integrate, there's a load of people who just get really angry over it. The legislature gets involved, though. So you have the president move, you have the Supreme Court move, and now the legislature. The legislature passes the first Civil Rights Act since Reconstruction. In 1957, they say, we're going to allow the federal government to prosecute anybody who denies another person's right to vote for any reason. Like, if you do it because of sex, no. If you do it because of race, no. You cannot deny somebody's right to vote who should have the right otherwise. So they create this 6-member Civil Rights Commission to go around and investigate complaints and ensure that voters have the right to vote. Then you have the Civil Rights Act of 1960, and it says federal courts are allowed to register people to vote. Why is this important? And I'm not trying to call out any particular state, but we will just say, in Alabama, would there be anybody in Alabama that may have not wanted to give people the right to vote? Okay. How do you resolve that? You put it on the federal level, and a federal employee has to obey federal law. And so if someone comes in and says, I want to vote, even if they are not appreciated by people from a particular state, the federal government says, nope, you do have the right to vote. All right. Now, in addition to the federal government pushing for civil rights, the people who are African Americans also push for the right to vote. So you guys get to see a beautiful drawing by Dr. Bath. Aren't you impressed? I'll put it over on this board. All right. Any thoughts on what this might be?
Bus.
A bus. All right. Now, I admit, this is like a school bus. Rosa Parks was not necessarily on a school bus. But we'll put some seats in here. All right. So now we have a bus with seats, right? Rosa Parks gets on a bus and she is told that she's not sitting where she should. Now, it's interesting because when I was going to school, I always thought Rosa Parks sat here on the front seat. But that's not the case. The buses, so what do we know about buses at this time? What do we know about buses and segregation?
There was 2 different doors that they could enter through. The back doors were used for coloreds, and the front doors were used for white people. The bus was basically split in half. The back section was for African Americans, the front section was for white people. And I'm pretty sure with like Rosa Parks, she sat somewhere towards the middle, but it was before the colored section, and that's the reason why they were like, you can't sit here.
All right. So, yes, there is 2 doors usually. The African Americans, or colored people as they were called at that point, had to sit in the back of the bus. White people would sit in the front of the bus. Now, some of the things that I didn't understand, you have several seats on these buses, right? So, African Americans have to sit near the back. What happens when there are more African Americans?
You have to stand.
Okay, if there's not people up sitting in the seats closer to the front, you can actually move further up, right? What happens if there are white people and there's more white people than there are black people?
That's when they have to give up their seat.
Yeah, then the seats move back and the blacks have to either take a seat in the black area or stand up. And this is the part that Rosa Parks is frustrated by. So the other piece is if you have a row of 4 seats, and if a white person is sitting here, you should be able to have a black person sit here, right? Does that make sense? And what's the answer? No, you cannot have a black person and a white person sitting in the same row. If a white person moves in, all the people on this row that are black have to get up and have to move to the back. But what happens if all these seats here are taken?
They stand.
They have to stand up. And again, this is what Rosa Parks is frustrated by. So Rosa Parks comes in, and there are normally seats that are designed or established for blacks, and so she sits in one of the furthest forward seats for African Americans. Now, I presume that these seats had all been taken because at some point 70% of the bus riders are black. So it makes sense that a lot of these seats are taken, right? And so she sits up here. There are white people moving in, so you have white people who are sitting here, and all of these seats are now taken up by white people. A new person comes on the bus, and what happens?
She sits in the black section.
The new white person says, there's no seats up here, so at this point, the bus driver says, take a seat here. But there are black people here. What happens?
Black people have to stand up.
They are asked, you guys need to all give up your seat and stand in the back. Rosa Parks says, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to sit in my seat. He can sit in this seat, I'll sit in this seat. And they say, no, no, ma'am, you can't do that. You have to get up and move. And she's like, that's not going to happen. So what happens to Rosa Parks? They arrest her. They arrest her for breaking the law. Now, the other thing that I'm guessing many of you guys don't know, Rosa Parks is not the first person to do this. A young lady named Claudette Colvin actually did this 9 months earlier. Why don't we know about Claudette Colvin?
Because Rosa Parks was a bigger civil rights activist than she was.
Rosa Parks gets specific recognition because she's the right kind of person. Rosa Parks is older. She's gone to church all the time. She has been a good employee, right? So all these things, she is like the picture of, hey, why are you messing with this older lady? Leave her alone, right? Claudette Colvin, if I remember right, was 16 or 17. She was still in high school, and oh, by the way, she was pregnant. And she didn't have a husband. Now, think about the media campaigns. And I'm not trying to dog Claudette Colvin, but do you want the face of your media campaign saying that this law is wrong to be an underage high school kid who is pregnant without a husband in the 1950s? No. That would be the wrong view. And so they basically say, hey, we're really sorry. You know, you get to suck this up. But the NAACP says, okay, this is something we want to fight. They actually had talked to Rosa Parks before. This is not Rosa Parks came home and she was just tired and just didn't really want to stand up. No, this was a planned out event that she was going to not give up her seat, and she was going to force the issue. She was going to be arrested, and this would give the NAACP and other people a chance to fight the law. So once she is arrested, all of the white supporters and the black supporters quit riding the bus. This is actually a more difficult thing than you might think. Some of the people live 10, 12 miles away from their jobs, right? Would you want to walk 10 or 12 miles every day? Morning and night? No. I mean, that's kind of a pain, right? Plus, the thing that makes this really scary is there are people in this area who decide we don't support the bus stoppage. We don't support this boycott. So if we see someone walking, we are going to go over and beat them up. We are going to go over and hit them with our car. So it became very scary for a lot of the people who are boycotting the bus. You could be walking along the road and a car stopped behind you. It could be someone who is very nice and says, look, I know you probably have a long walk. Why don't you let me take you to your employment? Or I know you're walking home. Let me take you home. It could be someone very nice who is trying to take care of you. It could also be someone who is going to beat you up and put you in the hospital so you lose your job. Yes, ma'am.
Wasn't it also during this time that like firefighters would hose people down?
So yes, there are other, so during demonstrations, some towns, the police and the firefighters would engage in acts against the people who are protesting or causing other problems. So yeah, we'll talk about that further, but yeah, so it's really kind of scary, but they boycott for 381 days. So when you think about it, how long is 381 days? Over a year. And so there are people who are walking this long, long distance to work every day for a year because they want to make the point that this isn't right. They also have women suing to remove the law. 5 different women sue and say this law is not correct. And their demands, they just want to be treated with courtesy. They want black drivers, and they want first come, first seated from the front and the back, which means that if a white person comes in and all the white seats are taken, then what does the white person need to do? Stand up, right? You're not going to force people who are already seated to get up and move. If someone comes in, then they get to stand up, and when a seat opens, they can sit down. So when they sue to remove the law, they take it to federal court. Why would you take it to federal court?
Because they already have so much going on the federal level, and also would apply to the state levels of the
Okay, if you can win this at the federal level, it applies to every state, not just one state. And so they think they have a better shot at winning in the federal court, and they want it to apply across the nation. So they go ahead and they sue in Montgomery Federal Court, and they rule that this violates the 14th Amendment. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Of course, is Montgomery going to stand for this? No. So they take it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, no, the federal court had it right. You have to integrate the buses. Now, intriguingly, does this change bus stops? No. They still segregate the bus stops, and the bus stops actually are much like what the buses now become. If you move into the white section and the white section is full, do you get to expand the white section and take over black seats? No. They have a white section and a black section, and everybody, if your side is full, then your side is full and you stand up, right? There is still some violence that we see from people who are angry over being told that you can't have segregation. All right. The other thing that happens, and this one is pretty fascinating to me, the NAACP, a bunch of guys get together and they say, look, let's go ahead and build on the success of this bus boycott. And so the Supreme Court has already said you will desegregate high schools, right? And so they start desegregating the high schools. I'm embarrassed to say, I always thought Little Rock was this bunch of racist, crazy people who refused to segregate. The opposite is actually the truth. The reason Little Rock becomes such a big deal is because Little Rock was starting to desegregate before any of the other major southern cities were, right? And so now you have Little Rock starting to desegregate, but they get a lot of pressure from the governor and from other people. And so they go, okay, we will slow down. At that point, if you remember, the Supreme Court had said with all deliberate speed, and they're like, nope, you already were moving, don't move backwards. You need to continue on with this process. So the school board has approved desegregation. Now they start to select students. And this becomes a big process. So what do you need to do if you want to ensure segregation works and you can select the people you want? What kind of people are you going to select?
If you want segregation to continue?
I'm sorry, desegregation.
Oh, well then the best students, the ones that have top grades, that are always in class, stuff like that.
Okay, and that's what they do. They say we're going to pick the best students who we know can move into a white school and succeed. We want people who are going to be coming to class every day, so that their reputation is going to be good. Hey, this is not someone who slides in at the last minute, who comes in late. This is someone who comes in consistently on time, pays attention, and does well in school. One other thing. Can you have someone who is going to respond violently to issues? No. So they actually come up with a group. They initially select 17 students, and these students are supposed to come in. Now, if you notice, they're called the Little Rock 9, not the Little Rock 17. Why 9?
Because there were only 9 that came, not.
Yes, there's only 9 that came. Any thoughts on why that might be?
Some of them were scared out of going to the school.
Some of them are terrified. Yes, they wanted to do it. They start the process, but then their parents' jobs are threatened, or their homes are threatened, their families are threatened. And so many of the people are like, okay, I really want to do this, but it's too dangerous and I don't think I can do it. So you have 9 who actually say, we're going to come. Governor Faubus, who is the governor of Arkansas, says you are not going to segregate a school in Arkansas. And he says, I represent the people, so this is not going to happen. If the governor does not want the school integrated, then is there a way for him to stop it? Now, this is interesting. Legally, does the governor have authority over a school board? No. He has no authority to tell them that they cannot desegregate. If the school board says they are desegregating, then the school board has the authority to do it. Now, the second piece is, even if he had authority over the school board, does he have authority over the Supreme Court? No. And the Supreme Court said, you will desegregate. So what legal authority does Governor Faubus have to not desegregate the school? None, right? All right, so Governor Faubus surrounds the school with the National Guard and says, you cannot allow these African Americans in here. President Eisenhower says, you know what? The Supreme Court said they are coming in. So he invites Governor Faubus up to talk to him. And this is just my guess, but I perceive Eisenhower taking him out on a golf game, right? And saying, hey, Governor Faubus, you're not an idiot, right? No. Okay. This is what we're going to do. And it'd be really stupid for you to violate the Supreme Court agreement to do this when everyone else is on board. And so by the end of it, he says, you're not going to defy the Supreme Court, right? And Faubus says, you're absolutely right. No, I will not defy the Supreme Court. And so, shockingly, he gets back, and what is the first thing he does? He calls up the National Guard, and he's like, surround the school, do not let them in. Now, Eisenhower's like, okay, first off, you just defied the Supreme Court, and secondly, you defied me. Now, I have worked with numerous generals, and I will guarantee you there is one thing that you can do that will tick off a general more than anything else. Any thoughts on what that might be? Not following a direct order. And Eisenhower's like, nope, we had an agreement. You understood the order. You were going to follow the order. You're not now. I'm not playing this game. So the mayor requests federal support. Mobs start to attack the students. The National Guard is there. Eisenhower sent federal marshals, the 101st Airborne, and federalized the National Guard. Now, let's start on the third part of that, right? Realistically, who does the National Guard work for day to day? The state. The National Guard works for the state governor. He is their CEO, their boss, under normal conditions. However, when the president determines that it is required, the president can federalize the National Guard. At that point, who do they work for? The federal government, the president, right? So why would he federalize the National Guard? Because then he can give them an order, and if they disobey the order, they go to prison. Now, he also throws in the federal marshals. Why would he send federal marshals down there? Who has the authority to arrest military personnel who are refusing to obey an order? Federal marshals, right? So he says, now you work for me. I can give you an order and you will obey that order. If you decide to be stupid and disobey an order from the president, then there are federal marshals who can arrest you. Now, the bad part is if you have 20 federal marshals but 5,000 troops, that's a little dangerous, right? So in that case, you send in the 101st Airborne. What do we know about the 101st Airborne? Has anybody ever heard the organization before? Okay, I have one person in the back. They are like the 82nd and the 101st are the baddest guys in the military at this time. They are the guys who, they're the paratroopers. And so if you want to start a fight, those are the guys that you want on your side, right? And so when you think about what Eisenhower does, he basically says, okay, you all work for me. I am putting federal marshals in, and if you disobey, they can arrest you. And if you get really stupid and start to shoot at one of the federal marshals, then we have the 101st, and they will kill you all. So now let's start over and let's play the game correctly. Now, once the National Guard is there, can they dismiss themselves? No. They're under orders. So now the guys that Governor Faubus brought in to shut the school down to prevent the African American students from coming are now ordered to escort the African American students through the crowds, right? So I just find it amusing that Faubus tries to use the military in his favor, and Eisenhower's like, you know what? I played with the military a lot longer than you do. I know the rules, so no, we're not going to do that. Ernest Green, one of the 9, actually graduates. He is the only one of the 9 that graduate from Central High School in Little Rock. Why don't the other 8 graduate?
Sabotage?
Yeah, that's actually the right answer. So he is the only senior that goes in and he graduates that year. The next year, Governor Faubus closes all public schools. So he would rather have you not be able to go to school and have a bunch of dummies in his state than he would allow there to be desegregated schools. So we do have, this is the first point of desegregation, and you have the opportunity where people say, okay, desegregation works. Now, the other thing is you have all these crowds of people. And again, I always thought that these were Little Rock people who were just jerks. What I found out is they are actually people who drove from Virginia and Florida and Georgia and Texas. all coming to Little Rock. Why would they come to Little Rock and scream at 9 students?
Because it won't be too long before it spreads to their state.
Okay, if this works in Little Rock, if it proves successful in Little Rock, it's going to expand. And if they can stop it in Little Rock, if they can say, this will not work, we're not going to allow it, then they think they can stop it from happening everywhere else. As you know, they're not successful, right? All right, so I think we talked about Joseph McCarthy last time. So kind of have a slide to roll through, but I think we have talked about everything here, so I'm going to skip on. And we will end with rock and roll. All right, so rock and roll, the original rock and roll is a mishmash of rhythm and blues and hillbilly country. So it's kind of interesting that it's these outside groups. Now, when I say rhythm and blues, who primarily plays rhythm and blues in the 50s? Right, African Americans. When I say hillbilly music, who normally plays hillbilly music? White people, but not city people, right? And so it's poor people for the most part. And they kind of, they mesh the styles together and they start playing music. Now, today, it would be a little more difficult because you see pictures of the people who are playing music, right? In the 1950s, you have radio and you have some TV, but most of the music is on the radio. And so when the DJs would throw on a song, you can know who the group is, but you don't know what they look like, right? And so they would throw in this rock and roll, and it might be Elvis Presley, but it may be someone else who is not white. And so it really gets interesting where they will just throw in different people, and all of a sudden, when you're buying the record, people, you bring home a record and it has an African American band, and your parents are like, oh, you can't listen to that. What are you going to say?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, well, it's people I like, I'm going to. And so it really does help push the racial boundary. It is interesting because rock and roll is built on the fact that in the 1950s and into the 60s, teens are closer to each other than they are to their parents. Remember, their parents are going to events, they're going to these organizations, and the kids start working outside of the home. And so they have opportunities to go to restaurants and meet, or I know for us, a lot of the kids, you would just drive every Friday night. They would drive up and down the roads on Main. I don't know why you would do that other than, it gives you a chance to hit on girls, or if you're a girl, to hit on guys, right? And so that's what everybody wants to do. The messages of rock and roll. When you think of songs, rock songs, what do they all talk about? Yeah. It's interesting because most of the songs talk about sex, or I'm really sad, or drugs, right? I mean, there's a lot of like, hey, I feel alone, I feel alienated. And as a teenager, a lot of people feel alienated. So you're like, yes, someone understands me. And I'm like, well, yes, pretty much all of you understand each other because everyone feels alienated. But we don't talk about our feelings, so we don't do that. The other thing that I think is interesting, look at these 3 pictures. What do you see about those pictures?
Only male.
Okay. They are only male.
They all can play instruments.
Say it again.
They all play different instruments.
Okay, they're playing different instruments. But for the most part, they're stringed instruments, guitars or whatever. The other thing though, what are they wearing? Suits. If you went to a concert now and you saw somebody in a suit, what would you think?
I think it depends on the suit though,
Oh, okay.
because Harry Styles is always wearing a suit.
Okay. I don't know. Is he rock?
He's just normal pop music. I think.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting because they're all dressed in suits. So they have to maintain certain standards. But they are focused on teenagers. Elvis Presley makes everybody, crazy because he actually swings his hips and gyrates during his songs. And so the people that like him are like, woo, that's really wonderful. And the parents are like, oh my goodness, this guy is moving his hips on TV. They actually had to move the camera up because they could not have him gyrating his hips on TV.
Elvis.
Yeah, Elvis the pelvis, right? Rock and roll is a little more crazy than you guys would think. It is actually a euphemism for sex. So now they would call it Netflix and chill, right? But it's interesting, and it really pushes to tie teenagers more closely to each other and to get money from the teenagers in kind of an act of rebellion. And so what we see is this push to say, hey, you're different than your parents. You need to be rebelling against your parents and pushing away the standards that they have, kind of lead to the rebellions of the 1960s, right? All right. So now we've talked about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. How did Eisenhower create the interstate highway system?
He signed a
Or-
contract.
Okay, he signed a contract. What's the purpose?
Military.
Protect us from nuclear war, right? All right. How has he advanced civil rights?
Desegregating everything the federal government controls.
Okay, desegregating what the federal government controls because he can't push the states to do it. And then describe some of the ways African Americans improve their civil rights. Boycotts, sit-ins. All right. So yeah. All right. So for our next class period, this is your readings and your questions. All right. How's everybody doing on their papers?
It's due tonight, right?
It is. So I did screw that up. It's supposed to be due 11:59 tonight.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
So
The assignment says it's due at 11.
Oh, okay, because I just have to proofread it and then turn it in.
all right.
Writing center didn't even change anything in mine.
Okay, then just turn it in. We're good.
I was like, okay. I feel like we wasted each other's time.
I'm trying to find how to turn it in on turnitin.com.
Okay.
It's asking for like a code and stuff.
Oh, so go ahead and turn it in into the assignment. You can pull the assignment up and it should let you just put it in there. If it doesn't, then let me know and just email it to
You
me.
don't know
It says,
It will automatically go to turn it in.
yeah, whenever you do it, there'll be like a little thing on the side that says 21.com, like submitted.
Oh, okay. And,
Yeah, I'll turn it in.
what about the slips for the writing center?
If you went to the